4 alien empires at war. Human captain sat down and made them listen to reason. Captain Jake Rourke heard the scream before he saw the blood. He'd been shuffling through the neutral station's cargo bay, another gray day in a gray life, when a child's terrified wail cut through the hum of machinery. His combat instincts, buried under 6 years of bitter exile, roared to life. He rounded the corner and froze. A Zelthari child, no more than 5 years old, stood trapped between 4 armed soldiers: Draconian, Varix, Krill, Azuran. Each empire's weapon was raised, fingers on triggers, the child directly in the crossfire. And on the deck beside her, a body, male Zelthari, fresh blood pooling beneath him. "Stand down!" Jake's voice cracked like a whip as he stepped into the kill zone, hands raised. "She's just a kid!" The soldiers whipped toward him, startled. One, a draconian shock trooper, snarled through his helmet. "Human, this doesn't concern you. Step aside." "Like hell." Jake moved forward, keeping his body between the child and the barrels. The little girl was sobbing, her translucent skin flickering with bioluminescent terror. A Zelthari stress response. Her small hands clutched at her father's blood-soaked jacket. "There's a bomb on my ship," the Varric soldier hissed, its mechanical voice flat. "Sabotage. These empires are responsible." "Lies!" the Krill warrior spat, her mandibles clicking. "It was Azuran treachery." Jake didn't listen to the rest. He lunged forward, scooped the child into his arms, and ran. A plasma bolt scorched past his shoulder, a glancing hit that burned through his jacket and seared flesh. He bit back a roar and kept moving, diving behind a cargo container as the station alarms began to wail. The child buried her face in his chest, her whole body shaking. She smelled like ozone and fear. "You're okay," Jake muttered, even as his shoulder screamed. "I've got you!" Footsteps thundered toward them. Station Commander Elena Voss arrived with a security team, barely stopping the 4 soldiers from tearing each other apart. She barked orders, established a perimeter, and then her eyes landed on Jake. "Rourke!" Her voice was sharp with disbelief. "What the hell are you doing here?" "Same thing I'm always doing," Jake said bitterly, cradling the trembling child. "Wrong place, wrong time." Elena crouched beside him, her face pale. "This is worse than you think. That sabotage? It's happening across all 4 docking bays. 4 empires. 4 bombs. Each one blaming the others." She paused and her voice dropped. "Their fleets are mobilizing. Full war footing. We're talking hours, Jake. Maybe less." Jake looked down at the little girl in his arms. Her bioluminescence had dimmed to a faint, heartbroken glow. She whispered something in her native tongue, a word he didn't understand, but the tone was unmistakable. She was calling for her father. He thought of the body on the deck, the blood, the way her small hands had tried to hold on. Elena grabbed his good shoulder. "You're the only one with experience across all 4 cultures. The only mediator they might—" "I'm not a mediator anymore," Jake cut her off. "That life ended 6 years ago." "Then what are you?" He didn't answer. He just looked at the child, felt her weight in his arms, and saw billions of other children across 4 empires, all of them about to burn. He exhaled slowly. "Get me a conference room." Elena blinked. "What?" "Get me a conference room, Commander." Jake stood, still holding the girl. His shoulder throbbed. His hands were steady. "I'm ending this today." 4 fleets, Commander Voss said, her voice tight as a wire, already burning towards contested space. 4 ambassadors have arrived, but they're barricaded in their respective embassies. They won't even breathe the same recycled air. She paced her small office, the sterile light glinting off the insignia on her collar. Jake sat in a medical chair, a dermal regenerator humming over the raw plasma burn on his shoulder. Lisa was curled up in his lap, fast asleep, her small body still trembling with the aftershocks of trauma. She hadn't let him go, not for a second. Centuries of blood feuds, cultural taboos, recent border skirmishes. "It's a diplomatic impossibility," Voss continued, gesturing at a tactical display showing 4 expanding circles of influence, about to collide. "They're just waiting for the first official shot to be fired." Jake watched the display. The cold math of war. Billions of lives represented by glowing icons. But his focus kept returning to the small, warm weight in his arms. Who was her father? He asked quietly, stroking Lys's hair. Voss pulled up a file. A kind, intelligent Zelthari face appeared on the screen. Dr. Torin Vey, a renowned xenobiologist, one of the galaxy's leading peace activists. She paused, her expression hardening. He was working on a classified interspecies medical project, highly sensitive. Jake felt a chill that had nothing to do with his wound. Commander, his death wasn't an accident, was it? No, Voss said, her voice dropping to a near whisper. Our preliminary forensics came back. The shot that killed him was a sniper round, fired from a concealed position. The firefight in the docking bay, the bombs on the ships, it was all staged. A meticulously planned assassination designed to look like a terrorist act and trigger this exact crisis. The pieces clicked into place with sickening finality. This wasn't a tragic misunderstanding. This was a script, a premeditated act of galactic arson. Someone wants this war, Jake breathed. Lisa stirred in his arms, murmuring her father's name in her sleep. Jake's hand tightened protectively on her back. He looked from the sleeping child to the face of her murdered father on the screen, and then to the looming threat of the war fleets. The impossible task Voss had described suddenly became deeply, violently personal. He gently brushed a tear from Lys's cheek. I'm going to find them, he promised the sleeping child, his voice a low iron vow. I'm going to find out who killed your father, and I'm going to stop this. His protective instinct and his mission were no longer separate. They were one and the same. To save the galaxy, he first had to get justice for her. Jake's first meeting was with the Draconian. Ambassador Thrace wasn't a diplomat. He was a walking mountain of scales and scars, his office decorated with the polished skulls of his enemies. He didn't offer Jake a seat. You are the human who failed at Cygnus X1, Thrace rumbled, his voice like grinding stones. You seek peace. Peace is a lie told by the weak to slow the strong. He gestured to a data slate showing a krill freighter allegedly planting the bomb. This is truth. The krill are vermin. We will cleanse them. There is nothing to discuss. Next was the Variks. The ambassador was a shimmering column of light, a cold AI collective mind, designated Consul Variks Prime. It didn't have an office, just a sterile computation chamber. Lisa, holding Jake's hand, shivered. Analysis. Human Captain Rourke, the AI's synthesized voice echoed. Elevated heart rate, residual pain indicators, emotional state, desperate. Your appeal is noted and categorized as irrational noise. A hologram materialized showing complex energy signatures that, according to the AI, proved an Azuran energy weapon was used to kill Dr. Vey. The Azuran calculation was flawed. They will be corrected. Logic dictates war. Then came the krill. Matriarch Scylla, her insectoid features etched with ancient pride, met him in a room filled with woven banners depicting her people's history, a history of enslavement by the Azurans. The High Lorekeeper wants to talk? She hissed, chitinous plates clicking in agitation. Her people's idea of talk is putting a chain around our necks. This is their treachery. It always is. Finally, the Azuran. High Lorekeeper Abanai was the picture of serene, ancient grace, serving Jake a fragrant tea he didn't touch. Captain, she said, her voice smooth as silk, but layered with condescension. One cannot reason with beasts. The Draconians understand only brute force. They stage this clumsy affair to justify their savagery. She looked at Lissa with something between pity and disinterest. A tragic casualty of barbaric cultures. Jake returned to his quarters, defeated. Every door was a wall. Every ambassador was locked in their own prison of history, honor, or logic. He sank into a chair, the plasma burn on his shoulder throbbing in time with the station's emergency alerts. On a monitor, the 4 war fleets crept closer to one another, a countdown to oblivion. He had failed. Billions would die because he couldn't get 4 people in a room. He felt a small tug on his sleeve. Lissa looked up at him, her wide, innocent eyes reflecting the terrifying images on the screen. She had been silent through all the meetings, a tiny, grieving shadow at his side. Why are they so angry? she whispered. Why don't they just talk? The question was so simple, so pure, it sliced through his exhaustion and the dense fog of diplomatic failure. He looked from the child's trusting face to the cold, distant fleets on the screen. Talk. They wouldn't talk protocol. They wouldn't talk politics. Traditional diplomacy was dead on arrival. But maybe they would talk about something else. A dangerous, insane idea began to form in his mind, sparked by a child's question. He needed a new approach, and he needed it now. Jake's half-formed idea was a spark of madness in a sea of despair. It was insane, suicidal even. But as he stared at the tactical display, at the four fleets inching towards annihilation, he knew traditional methods were a tombstone. He had to do something else. A soft chime cut through the silence. Not a station-wide alert, but a private notification on his personal datapad. The message was anonymous, the encryption level so high it made his military-trained eyes widen. The text was simple. You want to know who killed Dr. Vey? Come alone. Bring the child. She is your only protection. It was followed by a set of coordinates, a derelict maintenance conduit on the station's lowest level. A trap. It had to be. Yet the mention of Lissa as protection, not a hostage, felt strangely sincere. He looked at the sleeping child, curled up on the small cot in his quarters. Taking her into a potential ambush was unthinkable. Leaving her alone was worse. With a grim sigh, he gently scooped her up. She stirred, wrapping her small arms around his neck without waking. Her safety was the only mission parameter that mattered now. The conduit was dark, smelling of ozone and recycled air. A single light panel flickered overhead, casting long, dancing shadows. A figure emerged from one of them. She was a woman, tall and poised, with the delicate bone structure and faint luminescence of the Azuran people. But her features held a distinctly human cast, a hybrid. Captain Rourke, she said, her voice a low, urgent whisper. I'm Dr. Sarah Kane. I was Torrin's colleague. Jake held Lisa closer, his body instinctively shielding her. You have 1 minute to tell me why I shouldn't think you're the one who killed him. Sarah's eyes, a startling violet, were filled with a grief that matched his own. Because I loved him. And because he was on the verge of a breakthrough that would have saved billions of lives. She produced a small data crystal. Torrin didn't just advocate for peace, he was creating it. He had developed a universal retrovirus, a medical treatment that could adapt to the biology of all four species. It could cure the draconian scale blight, reverse the krill's genetic degradation, even stabilize the Azuran cellular decay. It would have rendered their biological differences, the very root of their xenophobia, irrelevant. Jake's mind reeled. Such a discovery wouldn't just reshape power dynamics, it would shatter them. A discovery like that, Sarah continued, her voice hardening, is bad for business, especially the business of war. She took a step closer. His assassination wasn't an act of war by one empire against another. It was a corporate hit, orchestrated by a shadow faction, a multi-species consortium of weapons manufacturers and war profiteers. They call themselves the Obsidian Compact. The name landed in the silence like a stone. Sarah laid it all out. The Compact had agents embedded in every delegation, feeding each ambassador tailored disinformation, stoking the embers of old hatreds into a raging fire. The bomb, the crossfire, her father's death, it was all a meticulously staged piece of theater designed for one purpose: to start a war that would make them rich for generations. This is everything Torrin gathered, she said, holding out the crystal. Encrypted financial records, intercepted communications, profiles of the agents on this station, including some in the ambassador's inner circles. It's the truth. Jake took the crystal. Its cool surface felt impossibly heavy. Sarah's gaze dropped to the sleeping child in his arms. They know the data exists. They will kill anyone who gets close to it. They will not hesitate to eliminate his daughter to secure their secrets. Jake looked down at Lisa, at her innocent face, oblivious to the galactic storm swirling around her. The weight in his hand was no longer just data. It was a father's dying wish. It was justice. His mission, once a desperate plea to stop a war, was now brutally simple. He wasn't a mediator anymore. He was a protector. "Let them come," Jake said, his voice a low growl that held no room for negotiation. "I'll be waiting." Jake didn't send a diplomatic summons. He requisitioned a simple dinner table and 5 chairs. He didn't convene a war council. He went to the station commissary and acquired flour, yeast, root vegetables, and tea leaves. His chosen location was the Grand Observation Lounge, a place of silent panoramic beauty now turned into a grim theater. Through its massive viewport, the 4 fleets hung in the void like jagged jewels, their weapon ports glowing with lethal promise. In the center of that room, Jake set the table himself, laying out a simple white cloth that seemed impossibly bright against the backdrop of impending war. He cooked. With his own hands, one of which was still bandaged, he kneaded dough and slid it into a sonic oven. He chopped vegetables and set a pot of thick, savory soup to simmer. The domestic human sounds, the hiss of the kettle, the thud of the knife, were an act of profound defiance in a room built to witness the majesty of stars, not the humble creation of a meal. Then he sent the message. To each ambassador on a private, unsecured channel. No titles, no honorifics. Just 16 words that were both an invitation and an accusation. Dr. Torrin Vay's daughter wants to meet the people who are going to decide her future. She's 6 years old. She'll be at the table in 1 hour. Come or don't. It was a preposterous, suicidal gamble, an appeal to an emotion he wasn't sure any of them still possessed. He gently woke Lissa. "I need your help with something," he said softly, coaching her. "You don't have to say a word. Just be brave." "Can you do that for your father?" She nodded, her eyes wide, and squeezed his hand. He led her to the table and sat her at its head. The hour mark came and went. The soup simmered. The bread was warm. The silence was absolute. Jake's heart hammered against his ribs. He had failed. Then the doors slid open. Ambassador Thrace entered first. The draconian warlord, clad in battle armor, strode in not as a diplomat, but as a warrior accepting a bizarre challenge. He saw the child at the head of the table, and his brutal features tightened, a flicker of something unreadable in his reptilian eyes. He took a seat without a word. Matriarch Scylla was next. The proud Krill leader moved with a predator's grace, her gaze sweeping the room before landing on Lissa. For a moment she was not an ambassador, but a mother, and a deep, instinctual shame crossed her face. She sat. High Lorekeeper Avenai of the Azurans arrived with an air of profound disapproval, as if walking into a barbaric ritual. But she came. Her sense of ancient propriety, of noblesse oblige, would not allow her to refuse the summons of an orphan child. Finally, with a faint hum of anti-grav projectors, Consul Varix Prime glided into the room. The AI collective likely calculated this gathering as a statistical anomaly, an illogical emotional event that required direct observation. It took the final chair. The doors slid shut. The 4 most powerful enemies in the galaxy sat at a simple dinner table, staring at a 6-year-old girl. The room was silent, save for the soft bubbling of the soup. But for the first time in centuries, they were all in the same space, breathing the same air, without a weapon drawn. Jake's gambit had worked. The war hadn't stopped, but for a single, fragile moment, it was holding its breath. Jake didn't begin with accusations or treaties. He began with a ladle. He moved around the table, the quiet sloshing of soup into simple ceramic bowls, the only sound against the distant, silent menace of the fleets outside. The aroma of roasted root vegetables and warm bread filled the space, a scent so fundamentally domestic it was an insult to the grandeur of the impending war. He placed a bowl before each of them, then sat down, leaving his own empty. "Before we decide the fate of billions," Jake said, his voice calm and even, "I want to ask each of you to share something, a memory of your family, of a child, your own if you had one." The silence that followed was heavy with contempt. Ambassador Thrace's jaw muscles bunched. This was an absurdity, a human weakness. Then to everyone's shock, the draconian warlord spoke, his voice a low, gravelly rumble, his gaze fixed on the viewport. "My son was a pilot. He died in the Varix skirmishes. He was young." He said the word as if it were a curse. The admission hung in the air, a raw, exposed nerve. The tension in the room didn't break. It transformed. Matriarch Scylla closed her eyes, and from her throat came a low, haunting melody. It was not a war chant, but a song of deep, keening loss, a traditional Krill morning dirge that spoke of empty nests and skies without flight. When she finished, Consul Varix Prime, the unfeeling AI, swiveled its optical sensor. A soft blue light projected from its chassis onto the center of the table. It wasn't a weapon schematic or a tactical display. It was a shimmering, three-dimensional image of two long-extinct organic beings, their forms strange and beautiful. "My creators," the AI's voice stated, devoid of inflection, but somehow imbued with a profound sense of orphanhood. "My birth code is a memorial to their extinction." Finally, High Lorekeeper Avenai, who had watched all this with an expression of stoic sorrow, spoke. She did not share a memory, but recited in ancient Azuran verse. "The star that falls is not forgotten," she whispered, her voice trembling slightly, "for its light travels on, and 1,000 generations from now, a child will look up and see it and not know they are gazing at a ghost." Lisa, who had listened to each story with wide, tear-filled eyes, looked at the four powerful beings who held her future in their hands. Softly, her voice barely a whisper, she said, "Thank you." That was it. That was the moment the dam broke. The warlord, the matriarch, the machine, the lorekeeper, they weren't looking at each other as enemies anymore. They were looking at each other as a father who had lost a son, a mother who sang of grief, an orphan built by a dead race, and a historian who knew all things end. They were beings united not by power, but by the universal crushing gravity of loss. Jake seized the opening, his voice cutting through the fragile quiet. "You all just proved you can sit in the same room, break bread, and grieve together without trying to kill each other." He leaned forward, his eyes meeting each of theirs in turn. "Congratulations, the hardest part is done." With the fragile piece hanging by a thread, Jake touched a control on his datapad. A holographic display bloomed over the table, replacing the image of the creators with something far uglier. Data. Encrypted files, now cracked wide open by Sarah Kine. "This is why Dr. Vey was killed," Jake announced, his voice hard as steel. The display shifted. Falsified intelligence reports, stamped with official draconian military seals, detailing an Azuran plot that never existed. Then, doctored schematics of Krill sabotage devices planted on Varix freighters. Financial records appeared next. A river of credits flowing from a shadow corporation called the Obsidian Compact into the private accounts of high-ranking officers, a draconian general, an Azuran intelligence chief, a Krill fleet captain, a Varix routing administrator, one from each of them, traitors all bought and paid for. "You weren't on the brink of war because of ancient hatreds," Jake said, his words hitting them like body blows. "You were on the brink of war because it's profitable. Your people were about to die to line the pockets of weapons manufacturers." The reaction was instantaneous and volcanic. Ambassador Thrace shot to his feet, his chair screeching back, a roar of pure fury building in his chest. Matriarch Scylla let out a low hiss, her eyes burning with the sting of manipulation. But the fury wasn't directed at the screen. It was directed at each other. "A convenient fiction," Thrace snarled, his gaze locking on Avenai. "How do we know you didn't fabricate this data to frame my people?" "We?" the High Lorekeeper retorted, her composure cracking into icy rage. "The Krill have always been masters of infiltration. This reeks of their duplicity." The room was shattering. The shared grief, the broken bread, it was all evaporating in a fresh wave of paranoia. Jake saw it in their eyes. The old hatreds were easier to believe than a conspiracy that made them all look like fools. The war was coming back, right here, right now. Then a small movement. Lissa, who had been silent, slid off her chair. With a quiet courage that dwarfed the powerful beings shouting around her, she walked to the head of the table and placed her father's datapad down. She pressed a single icon. A new voice filled the room. Not a hologram, just a voice. Warm, tired, but full of conviction. It was Dr. Torin Vey. If you are hearing this, her father's final message began, then I am likely dead. But my work, my hope, it must live on. They will try to use my death to start a fire. They will tell you to hate. They will hand you a weapon and point to your neighbor. It is their only power, to divide us. The room fell silent. The ambassador stood frozen, listening to the ghost. Look at your children, Dr. Vey pleaded, his voice thick with emotion. My daughter, all of our children. This treatment, this hope, it is for them. It has always been for them. Don't let them take that future from you. Don't let them divide you. The recording ended. The only sound was Lissa's quiet breathing. Her father's words, delivered with the devastating innocence of his orphaned daughter, had done what Jake's logic could not. It had cut through the centuries of paranoia and found the one thing they still shared, a reason to build a future, not burn one. Ambassador Thrace slowly sat down, the rage in his eyes replaced by a terrible, burning shame. A joint investigation, Matriarch Scylla declared, her voice rough but firm. We will hunt these traitors down, together. One by one they nodded. High Lore Keeper Avenai. Consul Varix Prime. The pact was sealed, not with a treaty, but with a dead man's plea and a daughter's tears. For the first time in centuries, the air in the room was not thick with hate, but with a fragile, determined purpose. The ambassadors, still reeling from the truth, began to draft the formal articles of their joint investigation. A new era seemed possible. Then the universe tore itself apart. The observation lounge's panoramic window didn't just crack, it detonated inwards in a shower of diamond-hard glass. Mercenaries in matte black armor rappelled into the room, their rifles spitting plasma. Simultaneously, explosions ripped through the corridor outside, cutting off any escape. Alarms shrieked, a soundtrack to betrayal. Jake didn't think. He acted. He threw himself over Lisa, his body a shield as he dragged her under the heavy Durasteel table. A plasma bolt seared his other shoulder, the pain a white-hot scream, but he ignored it. His old combat instincts, buried under years of bitter regret, roared back to life. He snatched a pulse pistol from a fallen station guard and returned fire. His shots precise, aimed to disable, not kill. But the attackers were everywhere, and they weren't all from the outside. Jake saw it with cold horror. One of High Lore Keeper Avenai's own honor guards turned his weapon on her. A draconian aide fired directly into the backs of Thrace's security detail. The enemy wasn't at the gates. They were already in the room. Sarah Kane burst in, flanked by station security, their weapons adding to the storm of light and sound. But it was too late. The damage was done. A heavy explosive charge detonated near the AI's pedestal. Consul Varix Prime's holographic form dissolved into a blizzard of static. Jake scrambled to its side, Lissa clinging to his back. The AI's core processors were exposed, glowing a fatal, pulsing red. Its voice, once a calm cascade of perfect logic, was now a fractured, dying whisper. Internal. Compromise. A subroutine. They used me. I was an unwitting accomplice. The admission was more devastating than any explosion. The embodiment of logic had been corrupted from within. I have failed logic. The AI buzzed, its light flickering. I have failed you. With its last reserves of power, Varix Prime's form solidified one final time. Its hand reached out, not as a physical limb, but as a projection of pure data, streaming from its dying core directly into the station's central network. Streams of unencrypted code flooded every monitor in the room. Access keys, leadership rosters, hidden bases. The entire command structure of the Obsidian Compact laid bare for all to see. Retribution, Varix Prime stated, its voice flat. Then its light went out. The pedestal fell dark, and the voice of the Varix Collective was gone forever. The silence left by the dead AI was a void, but it was filled instantly by a new terrible sound, the unified rage of three betrayed empires. Ambassador Thrace's face was a mask of fury, his fists clenched so tight his knuckles were white. Matriarch Scylla drew a ceremonial blade, its edge humming with lethal energy. Even the serene High Lore Keeper Avenai radiated a cold, focused wrath that was more terrifying than any shout. The data Varix Prime had unleashed was their weapon. They used us, Thrace growled, his voice like grinding stone. They turned us into puppets. Jake, his shoulders burning, pushed himself to his feet. He looked at the three most powerful beings in the sector, poised to tear each other apart just moments ago, and saw a new, dangerous alignment. Then make them pay, he said, his voice cutting through their anger. Varix gave you the keys to their kingdom. Use them. That was all it took. The rage was channeled, focused into a singular, deadly purpose. On a secure channel, Thrace's voice boomed across the bridge of his flagship. All fleets, new target coordinates. The Obsidian Compact Weapons Forge on Xylos. Burn it to the ground. From another monitor, Matriarch Sila's command was a sharp, vicious hiss. My warriors will board their command carrier. We will take their bridge and their honor. High Lorekeeper Abenai, with chilling calm, instructed her networks. Initiate asset seizure protocols. Freeze every credit, every account. By sunrise, they will be beggars. For the first time in history, Draconian cruisers flew alongside Azuran frigates. Krill assault pods launched from carriers bearing the sigils of their ancient enemies. It was a symphony of destruction, perfectly coordinated. But Jake's war was closer to home. They have a base here, he said to Sarah, gesturing to a sector of the station plans Varix Prime had exposed. It's where they're holding Vay's research team. He handed a sleeping Lissa to a trusted station guard. Keep her safe, no matter what. The little girl stirred, her brow furrowed in a bad dream, and Jake's heart ached. This was for her. With Sarah at his side and a squad of station security at his back, Jake stormed the station's maintenance levels. They blew the doors on a nondescript cargo bay, revealing a state-of-the-art covert operations center. Compact mercenaries opened fire, but they were financiers and spies, not soldiers. Jake and the security team moved with brutal efficiency, a wave of disciplined fire in motion. They found the captive scientists huddled in a shielded lab, terrified but alive. And in the command center, surrounded by monitors displaying his crumbling empire, they found him. Overlord Kess. He wasn't a warrior or a monster. He was just a man in an expensive suit, a predator who had grown fat on the spoils of manufactured wars. He looked at Jake not with fear, but with annoyance, as if his day had been inconvenienced. Jake didn't give him the satisfaction of a fight. He simply raised his pistol. It's over. Miles away in the safety of the commander's office, Lisa was awake. She wasn't watching cartoons. She was watching the news feeds on a massive monitor. She saw Draconian ships firing their main cannons, not at the other fleets, but at a common enemy. She saw Krill warriors fighting back-to-back with Azuran guards. She saw the galaxy's bitterest enemies fighting together. She didn't understand the politics or the strategy. She only knew that the monsters who had killed her father were being stopped, and everyone was finally on the same side. For the first time, she saw a glimmer of her father's impossible dream, made real by fire and fury. Overlord Kess was dragged into the observation lounge, not in chains, but flanked by 4 immense draconian guards who were themselves a kind of cage. He straightened his immaculate suit, a sneer twisting his lips. He scanned the room, the 3 ambassadors standing like statues, the broken station security chief, and finally Jake. His eyes, cold and reptilian, held only disdain. An impressive tribunal, Kess said, his voice dripping with condescending amusement. The warlord, the zealot, and the dusty academic. Do you really think this little drama changes anything? My connections run deeper than your histories. I'll be free by morning. Jake, leaning against a bulkhead for support, felt a surge of hot rage, but he pushed it down. He was battered, his shoulder throbbed with a dull fire, and every muscle ached. But as he looked at the 3 beings who had been on the verge of galactic war, he knew this wasn't his moment. He had brought them to the table. The rest was up to them. He gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod. Ambassador Thrace stepped forward first. His voice was not the roar of a warlord, but the flat, hard crack of a glacier breaking. In the Draconian Empire, there is no greater crime than profiting from the death of warriors while hiding in the shadows. You are not a commander. You are not a strategist. You are a carrion eater. Thrace reached out and, with two fingers, tore a small, pin-like device from Kess's lapel. A passkey to some exclusive club, now just a piece of scrap. I declare you void of rank, of title, of honor. When your name is spoken, it will be as a curse. Kess's smirk tightened. Honor is a fantasy for brutes. Next was matriarch Scylla. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. Her words carried the weight of centuries of suffering. My people have a word for those who break the sacred bonds of trust for personal gain. Krethva. The word fell into the silence like a stone. It means the unsold. The honorless dead who are still forced to walk. You are exiled not just from our lands, but from the memory of all who have ever lived. To the krill, you no longer exist. Kess laughed, a dry, ugly sound. An ancient superstition. I'm trembling. Finally, High Lore Keeper Avenai glided forward, her gaze cool and analytical. She held a data slate. Your threats are based on wealth. Your influence is based on assets. According to ancient Azeran law, ratified by the Inter-System Trade Concord, all assets acquired through the deliberate fomenting of war are declared forfeit. She tapped the screen. Your accounts are frozen. Your corporations have been seized. Their holdings will be used as reparations for the families of those who died because of your greed, beginning with the estate of Dr. Torin Vey. You are not a king, Overlord Kess. You are a beggar. At that, the smirk on Kess's face finally shattered. His wealth wasn't a tool. It was his identity. He stared, his face paling, the realization hitting him that he had been dismantled not by weapons, but by laws. He was nothing. As he was dragged away, silent and broken, the news feeds on the wall lit up. Fleets were standing down. The Obsidian Compact was being dismantled, its agents arrested in a dozen systems. Dr. Vey's face was everywhere, a martyr for a peace he had died to create. Then on the great table where they had first shared a meal, High Lorekeeper Avenai placed a single sheet of shimmering data vellum. Jake, holding Lysa's small hand in his, watched as Thrace, Scylla, and Avenai, the warlord, the matriarch, and the lorekeeper, each placed their mark upon it. A new coalition government, a joint scientific endeavor. At the top of the document, in elegant script, were the words that sealed the new age, the Vey Accords. Lisa looked up at him, her eyes wide, and for the first time Jake saw not a terrified orphan, but the living legacy of a man who had saved them all. The Vey Accords shimmered on the table, a testament to the impossible. But the adrenaline that had held Jake together for hours finally dissolved, and the cost of that victory came due. The universe swam, the edges of his vision turning gray and fuzzy. The glancing plasma burn on his shoulder screamed, a white-hot counterpoint to the dull, heavy ache spreading through his body. His legs gave out. The last thing he saw before the world went black was Sarah's panicked face rushing toward him. He woke to the quiet, rhythmic beep of a medical monitor and the sterile white ceiling of the station infirmary. A pressure bandage was wrapped tightly around his shoulder, and the exhaustion was still there. But it was a clean, healing weariness now, not the ragged edge of collapse. Sarah was asleep in a chair beside his bed, her head resting on her arms. Over the next few hours, he received visitors. First came Thrace. The draconian warlord stood at the foot of the bed, his posture as rigid as ever, but the harshness in his eyes was gone, replaced by a grudging respect. He said nothing, simply stepped forward and placed a heavy, iron-gray medallion on the table beside Jake. It was etched with the sigil of a draconian battle fleet. For valor in the face of dishonor, Thrace rumbled, the highest praise a warrior of his kind could give. He gave a sharp nod and was gone. Later, matriarch Scylla entered, her movements silent and graceful. She approached his bedside and placed a gentle, three-fingered hand on his forearm. The krill do not have medals, she said, her voice a low, melodic hum. We have family. You stood for our future. You are now kin-sworn to my clan. You will never walk alone. High Lorekeeper Avenai arrived with a small, velvet-lined box. She opened it to reveal a crystal star that seemed to drink the light of the room and refract it into a soft, blue-white glow. The Azuran Star of Peace, she explained. It is given to those who avert a war, not win one. We haven't awarded one in 5 centuries. Even Varric's prime successor, a new collective intelligence already coalescing in the station's network, sent a message that appeared on the screen above his bed. The text was simple, devoid of emotion, yet it was the most profound of all. Logic without compassion is an incomplete algorithm. You have corrected our core programming. We are in your debt. Jake was overwhelmed, the weight of their gratitude heavier than any weapon he'd ever held. He had started this as a disgraced mediator, a ghost haunted by failure. Now he was a hero, an honored kin, a peacemaker. But the titles felt hollow, distant. The only thing that felt real was when the door slid open a final time. Sarah walked in, holding Lissa's hand. The little girl looked hesitant, but she walked to his bedside, her eyes wide and serious. She looked at the medallion, the crystal star, and then at Jake's bandaged shoulder. "Sarah says you're going to be okay," she said quietly. Jake managed a weak smile. "Sarah's a smart lady." Lisa clutched a small data pad in her other hand. She said she's going to take care of me now, and we're going to finish my dad's work." A shadow of grief passed over her face, but she stood tall. Then she looked directly into his eyes, her own welling with a question that held the fate of his entire world. "Will you stay with us?" All the honors, all the praise, all the galactic implications faded to nothing. There was only this child, asking him not to be a hero, but to be a part of her life. He was no longer the man who had failed to save a galaxy. He was the man who had saved her, and in doing so, had saved himself. Tears he didn't know he had left burned in his eyes. He reached out with his good hand and gently brushed her cheek. "Yeah, kid," he choked out, his voice thick with an emotion he hadn't felt in a decade. "I'm not going anywhere." 18 months later, the light pouring through the observation lounge viewport was different. It no longer illuminated warships poised for annihilation, but a steady glittering stream of civilian transports and trade vessels. A river of life flowing between worlds. The lounge itself was unrecognizable. Once a sterile, tense space that nearly hosted the end of the galaxy, it was now the Vey Institute, a vibrant hub of learning filled with the quiet murmur of a dozen different languages. Jake stood at the back, no longer the weary mediator, but the Institute's director of conflict resolution. He wore a simple civilian jacket, the weight of it far lighter than his old military insignia. Beside him, Sarah slipped her hand into his, a familiar, grounding warmth. Her touch was his new anchor. On the central dais, a young girl, poised and confident, finished her presentation. It was Lissa. Her voice, clear and strong, carried across the silent, mixed-species audience. She was demonstrating the final application of her father's universal medical treatment, now a reality that was saving lives from the draconian core worlds to the Krill outer colonies. Jake saw them in the crowd, Ambassador Thrace's stern-faced apprentice, sitting next to Matriarch Sila's daughter, both taking notes. High Laura Keeper Avenai's young protege was there too, occasionally nodding in agreement. The children of war, now learning peace together. He thought back to that single, desperate dinner. We didn't end war, he reflected, the thought clear and calm in his mind. That's too big a beast to kill in a day. But we proved something just as important, that even the bitterest enemies can choose to listen. As applause filled the room, Lisa's eyes found his. A brilliant smile lit up her face. She bounded off the stage, weaving through the crowd of dignitaries and students, and launched herself into his arms. "Uncle Jake!" she cried, hugging him with all her might. He held her close, burying his face in her hair, the scent of home and hope. He looked over her head at Sarah, who was smiling at them both, her eyes shining. The ache of his past, the ghost of his failure, was finally gone, replaced by the solid, unshakable weight of a child in his arms, in a future at his side. He smiled, a true, easy smile that reached his very soul. He was finally at peace.